challenges to organizing in this space. And I think for us, it's important to understand the specificities of gig workers' politics and resistance in different national and regional contexts. So to this end, it's a privilege and very rare opportunity to have three amazing speakers from across three countries, India, Indonesia, and South Africa. And the three speakers have done some really in-depth research on gig work in their countries. And we're very honored to have them to engage in this trans-regional dialogue. We really believe this is really important for creating a space for co-production of knowledge in Africa and Asia about urgent global challenges. And it's also important to have this space to build mutual understanding and build connections between labor scholars and activists in Asia and Africa. And of course, this event exemplifies this transnational collaboration. It is jointly organized by three organizations, institutions. I will mention them briefly. First of all, it's the Asia Research Center, ARC, at the University of Indonesia. So ARC is an interdisciplinary research center that aims to strengthen social resilience through comparative analysis developed from collaborative research excellence. Second, we have the Center for Asian Studies in Africa at the University of Pretoria in South Africa. It is a hub for Asian studies and for studies of historical and contemporary connections between Asia and Africa. The center promotes critical research on global transformations and global developments through trans-regional dialogues and research collaboration. And of course, a special thanks to Professor Alf Nielsen, who is also here with us. He has been instrumental in organizing this event and for in inviting all of the speakers and myself. And finally, my own publication, the Asian Labor Review. The Asian Labor Review is a journal both about and for labor movements across Asia. We want to really cultivate critical inquiries about workers' living and working conditions, about the ways in which they organize and resist. But ultimately, we really want to build understanding and solidarity among workers across Asia and beyond. So as I mentioned, we have three amazing speakers. I would give them a fuller, more detailed introduction before their individual talks. So we have, first of all, Anjali Chauhan. So Anjali is a doctoral researcher at the Department of Political Science, University of Delhi in India. Her specialization is in feminist political economy, and her research analyzes the impact of neoliberal development on women working as informal workers. She recently published a really wonderful piece on Asian Labor Review. It's called Agitating on Wheels. She has also published on a range of other publications. So each speaker will have about 15-20 minutes for their presentation, and we'll have a Q&A at the very end after all the three speakers have finished speaking. So without further ado, Anjali, please.
Thank you, Kevin, for having me and for such generous introduction. Let me share my screen. Yeah. So hello, everyone. I am Anjali Chauhan, doctoral researcher at Department of Political Science, University in Delhi. And today I'm going to present my working paper titled Existing Between Plight and Protest, a case of delivery workers of Delhi. So without much further ado, beginning with it. So in the month of April 2023, a sequence of protests, demonstration and strikes by delivery workers called Partners by the Company at Zomato-owned Blinkit, India's 10-minute delivery platform, has highlighted the exploitative nature of the gig economy. The protests, emerged in response to Blinkit's introduction of a new payout structure for delivery workers, wherein the minimum payout per delivery was reduced to just rupees 15, which comes down to $0.18. As you can see in the slide, this is the evolution of Blinkit's pay system. So previously, workers received a monthly salary, which was subsequently changed to per order system, starting from rupees 50, then further reduced to rupees 25, and now it stands at just rupees 15. Consequently, Blinkit workers are now projected to earn rupees 600 to 700 as opposed to earlier 1200 per month. For several months, locations of Delhi and surrounding areas were transformed into hubs of workers' protests and unrest. These demonstrations stemmed from the threat to workers' livelihood posed by the company's abrupt and undue wage reduction and policy changes. However, this incident was not a standalone event. India has been consistently witnessing robust workers' protests and strikes within the gig economy. In 2019, Zomato encountered significant strikes by food delivery workers. In 2020, Swiggy delivery workers staged protests in Chennai and other various regions in the south. The ride-hailing sector in India, represented by Ola and Uber, has also faced similar unrest. And lastly, the urban company, the India's largest home service provider, saw waves of protests by workers in 2021. So amid such mounting discontent and resistance in this paper, I intend to address the following three questions. Firstly, defining and analyzing the new work order marked by gig economy. Secondly, why is this new work order generating so much of resistance among the workers? And lastly, taking the case of App Workers Unity Union, I would closely study how the union is responding to this new work order and how is it organizing at the wake of it. As for the methodology, this paper draws out from a qualitative study involving in-depth interviews of 5 Blinkit delivery workers and 2 union workers, along with participant observation of delivery worker strikes and May Day rally and demonstration carried out in Delhi in the month of April and May, which I did as a part of the report that I wrote for Asia Labour Review. Also, the interview were face-to-face in nature in the local language, that is Hindi, used semi-structured interview structure designed to capture the workers' experience of both delivery workers and unions, and were carried out at the warehouses where the delivery workers waited for their orders, and in case of unionists, it was carried out telephonically. So in a nutshell, I triangulated my methodology with interviews of workers and unionists, with on-the-ground, on-the-field observation of protests and strikes, along with a close eye on the social media platforms like Twitter and Facebook. These findings were further supplemented by secondary data from various reports and other secondary literature. So coming to the first part of the paper, gig economy, is it an old wine in a new bottle? The gig in the term gig economy refers back to the short-term arrangement typical of musical events. However, now its definition ranges from non-traditional and loosely structured work arrangement to the one with more precise emphasis on tasks carried out through online platforms and crowdsourced marketplaces. Now this directs us to ask, what is new in the new work order of gig economy? Gig economy, as it takes predominance from the last decade, has sent labor relations in India vis-a-vis the world in flux, which are steadily metamorphizing towards a more dispersed, flexible, and casual economic order, forwarding neoliberal capitalism. Now, capitalism stands as an extremely crucial vantage point to understand gig work. By foregrounding this work on the theoretical grounds of capitalism as a larger object of analysis, and to situate phenomena associated with neoliberalism, historically will guide us against any propensity to exaggerate recent events as being necessarily unique, distinctive, or new. Comes out that it isn't as new as it sounds. From a historical perspective on capitalism, breaking up jobs into small, low-skill tasks, on-demand work, piecework compensation, or an intermediary-based business model are nothing new to capitalism, and thus it can be called an old wine in a new bottle. Historicizing capitalism holds significant importance as capitalism is not a static or a given phenomena, rather it undergoes remarkable transformation over time. Therefore, what stands new in the new economic order of gig work is not its intent or consequent implication, but its mode of operation. It utilizes a democratized technology to tap the freely available workers and workforce in digitally informal ways. This brings us to the second part of the paper, gig workers, partners, or magicians. In India, as well as in most part of the world, labor laws does not extend to regulate food delivery or gig workers at large who are associated with digital platforms because the nature of their work relationship doesn't align with the traditional employer-employee dynamic. These platform aggregators categorize food delivery workers as delivery partners or delivery agents rather than employees, allowing company to avoid compelling with labor laws and thus minimizing their labor cost. Blinkit, which claims to be one of the largest e-grocery company of India and aims to be 100 times of its size in the coming 5 years, proudly announces its mission to be instant commerce indistinguishable from magic. The screenshot that I have attached is from the Blinkit's website only. Blinkit pledges to revolutionize e-commerce by making goods available to the customer in the blink of an eye. But the larger question remains how and at whose cost? In the grab of fancy marketing and close to unachievable delivery targets lies the plight of the delivery workers who go through enormous mental and physical turmoil to remain in the job. When asked how do they manage to deliver on time, a Blinkit worker who doesn't wish to be named said, quote unquote, the pressure to deliver in 10 minutes as per company's policy often leads to accidents and injuries to us. However, if one encounters an accident, ill health, or even a family emergency, and do not come to work for 2 or 3 days, even when they have let the company know beforehand, still the company withholds their IDs, even block their IDs, and sometimes their accounts will be permanently blocked. And this anecdote brings us to the subhead, now visible, now invisible. The delivery workers exist between the paradoxical conundrum of visibility and invisibility. The India's booming gig and platform economy report by Niti Aayog 2022 indicates that in the fiscal year 2020-2021, approximately 7.7 million of individuals were involved in the gig economy. Projections suggest that the gig workforce is anticipated to grow significantly, reaching 23.5 million workers in the fiscal year 2029 and 30. Then findings of Future Shopper Report 2022 in India, there are strong expectations among online shoppers to receive their deliveries as quickly as possible, with a substantial number indicating a preference to receive their deliveries within 2 hours they place their orders. Approximately 46% of surveyed Indian shoppers expressed this expectation, a rate which was highest globally. So there is both supply and demand of delivery workers. These surveys also align with the expanding landscape of gig services that prioritizes instant customer satisfaction, exemplified by platforms like Zepto, Blinkit, Zomato, which commit to delivering orders under 10 to 15 minutes. These reports show that the number of gig workers as well as the workload of every gig worker is consistently increasing, thus rendering them hyper visible. However, such statistics also point in the direction of increasing pressure on delivery workers to adhere to unachievable targets. Additionally, as they are paid on per delivery basis, so there is this inherent impetus to deliver as many orders as possible to supplement their income. which often leads to accident, injuries, and psychological stress. Deepak, a blanket delivery worker who works in Rana Pratap area of Delhi, when asked about safety issues, told, quote unquote, even if some accident or unfortunate incident happens, no seniors still come here. In case of accident, we are compensated only when we have a bill from the government hospital or dispensary. How can you look for only a government hospital when you are lying in the middle of the road with an arm or a leg broken? The constant pressure to deliver in time, to maximize customer experiences, along with prolonged use of mobile phones, job insecurity, and pressures to get penalized in terms of non-delivery or some damage, leads to workers' dehumanization. Also, as soon as workers wear the company's t-shirt, their individual identities get subjected to the name of the company. But on the other hand, the company denies their association by calling them partners, not workers, thus rendering them virtually invisible. Where do they stand? Added, these escalating challenges faced by delivery workers who are obscured from being referred as partners rather than workers, coupled with misleading portrayals of happy delivery workers by e-commercial of these companies, and a lack of effective mechanism to address their concern, confirms to their invisibility. To understand the functioning of gig work properly, I took a dig into Foucault. Now, Foucault built on Bentham's panopticon to arrive to his idea of panopticism. The panopticon was an idealized, as you can see in the picture, this is a typical architectural design of a panopticon. The panopticon was an idealized, cost-effective late 18th century architectural model of prison, which consisted of a single central concealed watchtower that can view all subjects without a subject being able to see whether they are being monitored or not. So this middle portion, the middle circle, is the watchtower, and on the circumference, these little cells are where the subjects reside, the prisoners, or it can also be an asylum. So the thing is, the subjects can not watch the what's inside the watchtower, but the guard in the watchtower can see all the subjects in the cells. This arrangement induces a state of permanent visibility and constant surveillance, which makes the bodies of the subjects behave in a certain manner. Taking this essence, Foucault, in his book Discipline and Punishment, describes panopticism as a discipline mechanism, a mechanism that must improve the exercise of power by making it lighter, more rapid, more effective, a design of subtle coercion for societies to come. This provides us the framework to dissect the hollow claims of gig work being the propagator of individual liberty, freedom, autonomy, choice, and that individuals are their own boss. Here, I argue that panopticon today is the digital platform. As soon as a gig worker log in with the app, they get subjected to an external invisible authority that translates consumer demands into orders that they need to execute. It determines what tasks they have to do, where and when. It directly or indirectly determines how much money they will be paid for execution of such tasks, thus leaving them with almost nothing that they can decide for themselves. This can also be called algorithmic authoritarianism, as it is the algorithm which is dictating every move to the worker, though through the panopticon, failing to which they can either be penalized or removed. When asked Rakesh Kumar, another blanket delivery worker, about the claims of the company in the name of freedom and autonomy, he said, quote unquote, all this is on the paper. The reality is that once we come here to work, immediately our schedules are made. Even if orders are beyond the schedule, we are forced not to leave without completing them. We are threatened that if we do not abide, then next morning we will not be able to work and our IDs will be blocked. We are often strictly told by the team leaders that we cannot leave before 12 a.m. or even sometimes 2 a.m. I am the sole owner of a family of 6 members, and to make a living for us, I have to work 14 to 16 hours a day. If the company, ever gets to experience what we go through doing our work when it's raining or in extreme hot and cold weather, they will get to know. So if this is the situation in hand, how is the union organizing the gig workers, or how the unions are responding to it? Which brings us to the third and the last part of the paper: induced individualism versus efforts for collectivism. The conditions under which workers operate, as we saw, are generating resentment and discontent among workers. Parvez and Ranjan points out that out of 92% of 61 million jobs generated since liberalization in 1991 in India were found to be informal jobs, as revealed by a periodic labor force survey conducted by National Sample Survey Organization in 2017 and 18. This highlights the already existing highly uncertain and precarious nature of working conditions in Indian labor market, which was then utilized by the platforms to create such a work environment where workers had absolutely no bargaining power. The continuous precarization of gig work and increasing unemployment rates leave workers extremely vulnerable, making collective actions and unionization difficult, for the risk involved are too high. Surya Prakash, who coordinates the union, which has been on the forefront of Delhi's blanket delivery protest, when asked about the challenges that the union face, told, quote unquote, "As many of them lead an economically challenging life, we need to think about how long they can protest. Every day they protest counts as a wageable day gone, however small that wage may be. Anyways, after 1960s, unionization has become extremely difficult due to various reasons like liberalization and globalization, and added to that, the present issue is about unorganized sector, which makes it doubly challenging. Thus, to translate resentment into resistance becomes an extremely difficult task when nature of the work is fragmented and mobile, with piecemeal tasks instead of collective, inducing strong atomization and individualization tendencies amongst the worker. The growing lack of clear employer location, rendering jobs more borderless, poses difficulties for workers to both organize together and their capacity to leverage labor laws and other legal protection. Individualism, insecurity, and precarity has always been decisive features of capitalism, and currently neoliberalism stands exaggerating them. Gig work has further broadened its ambit. Individualism now entails individualization of risk and burdens, individualization of labor process, with labor outcomes as merely representation of workers' will to work and talent. Moreover, in case of complaints and resistance, individual resolutions are proposed to collective complaint, and most often workers are asked to quit if they are dissatisfied, as there is a readily available influx of workers to take their positions. Abhishek, General Secretary of the Union, shared how union has been organizing workers under the union. To begin with, organizers closely observe the pattern of work that gig workers perform across platforms. Having gained a firm hold of issues, they start tracing the location where the workers can be usually found: on the streets, on the roads. This is followed by a dialogue with the workers discussing their conditions and the external and internal functioning of the platforms. A foundation of trust is built through constant support and compassion, and this leads to unionization, which further strengthens and holds them collectively. They can then discuss their grievances and together discuss how can the union or the workers' struggle can be taken forward. The union fought extensively against the blanket arbitrary pay reduction, leading to significant dents in workers' income. For almost a week in April 2023, the blanket app shows the services as being temporarily unavailable as hundreds of workers are on strike due to the pay reduction. The protesting workers actively took part in large-scale demonstration and possessions of May Day as well. These pictures are from the May Day protest and demonstration. This event involved diverse trade unions from across the country, along with workers and supporters. The gathering transformed into a meeting where collective calls were made to advance labor movement and put an end to workers' exploitation nationwide. To resist, the labor movement also took a digital route with a Twitter storm on April 16th. Numerous people varying from academia, activists, journalists, students, among others, and with organizations like CPIML Liberation, South Asia Solidarity, and various gig workers union extended the solidarity in support of gig delivery workers with the hashtag I stand with Blinkit. In response, Blinkit blocked the app-based IDs of the workers who were involved in the protest. Their names were removed from the company's database, and they were asked to give in written the guarantee that they would not participate in the strike. Further, a team of delegates from the union submitted a memorandum to Union Labor Ministry on 27th April. This picture on the left is the memorandum. And the memorandum laid out various demands, which included Blinkit to immediately roll back its new play card, to give permanent status to all app-based delivery workers, to ask the companies to ensure 8 hours of work per day, among others. Conclusively, while the gig economy heavily relies on internet and smartphones, its perceived success is not rooted in technological innovations, but rather in the age-old exploitation of labor. This gig work hinges on 3 crucial factors. First, the deliberate misclassification of workers as freelancers. Second, maintenance of a sizable pool of workers who compete for work and orders. And thirdly, the bargaining power of workers touching its lowest ebb due to the structural constraints. The key facilitators are the large number of unemployed workers and the absence of regulatory checks, which empower companies to operate in this manner. They can attract customers by providing inexpensive goods and services, utilizing technology in ways that dehumanize or make invisible the human workers delivering the service. It was also revealed that a significant portion of gig delivery workers, especially those dependent on this work for their livelihoods, continue to operate in highly precarious conditions characterized by low remuneration and extending work hours. And here comes to an end. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This is really a quite empirically rich and theoretically very sophisticated paper. So thank you for the presentation. And I think there are so many things that in your paper that are worth sort of unpacking more, discussing more. I just wanted to mention one thing. I think thinking about this question, on the one hand, gig workers are among the most precarious and sort of individualized kind of workers, right? But at the same time, they also appear to be very much ready for acting collectively in India, in Indonesia, and in all the other places. So maybe we can get into more of how this apparent sort of contradiction can be understood. So it's also a reminder, if anyone has any question for any of the speakers, you can put this in the Q&A box. We'll do a couple of rounds of Q&A at the very end. So please feel free to put your question in the Q&A box anytime. So thanks so much, Anjali. Next up, we have Tika Yausa, teaches at the Department of Sociology and is also the Deputy Director at the Asia Research Center, Faculty of Social and Political Sciences at the University of Indonesia in Indonesia. Her research activities are centered on increasing precarity in work and in life under neoliberal pressures, and its link to social and political developments in contemporary Indonesia and across Southeast Asia. So Dika, please go ahead.
Oops, I was not sure how to unmute myself. Thank you, Kevin. Listening to Anjali's presentation.
Tika, is there a way to make it bigger? Otherwise, it's a little bit small.
Oh, okay.
If you can just play the. There you go. Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Listening to Anjali's presentation, I realized that there's a lot of commonalities from my research in Indonesia, and I will pick up on what Kevin said, the contradictions between individualization and collectivism. That's the sort of theme that I've tried to deal with in my research. So it's about how the gig workers in Indonesia normalize and resist the gig economy, and how that contradictions affect the subjective experiences of working, and also their propensity to organize, and also their collectives. I will try my best not to repeat what has been said by Anjali. So as mentioned by Kevin and Anjali, the gig economy is part of the new business that rely a lot on precarious work. So we all believe, I guess, here that the rise of the 21st century gig economy indicates how the nature of work and the workplace are changing under neoliberalism. I specifically study those who make a living as app-based transport services in Indonesia, known as online transport, consisting of online taxi and online motorcycle taxi as part of the broader gig economy. These app-based transport services in Indonesia are provided by two main companies. They are the two major players. They are Gojek and Grab. Grab was initially founded in Malaysia, but along with Gojek, they have spread their business, and they are currently the leader of the market in Southeast Asia. So as mentioned by Anjali, the precarious working condition, the degrading working condition have created a pressure that make it possible for these workers who are actually atomized and fragmented to come together as a collective. But however, I've seen some paradoxes in their activism in Indonesia, and to me, the paradoxes actually demonstrated the paradox, the contradiction between forces that drive to individualization and others that drives to collectivism. Here are some of the paradoxes. First, I look at the newspaper the news and see what the protest is about. If you look at Indonesian newspaper, you will see lots of protests organized by these gig workers. But what are the protests about? Some of them are about the demand to improve working condition. This is the most current. They demand for employee status. This is actually quite new. It's from 2023, 10 October, so very recent. But this is not really common in Indonesia based on the research that I have conducted. So they have started the protest and demonstration in 2015 when Gojek and Grab start to be really big in Indonesia. But this protest here to demand employee status seem to contradict the other protests here, the other mass collective organization here. I cannot find the English versions, but this is about the workers supporting the new law on job creation. The law on job creation promise new job opportunities, but at the same time, it actually promotes casualization, meaning that such law will make job more precarious. So at the same time, some of these workers demand for a better, stable work status, but some of them also support the shift toward casualization, toward precaritization that this group, the other group of workers resisting. So that's one contradiction that I found. The other paradoxes, the protests are not always about working condition, and it's not always related to, even it's not related to working conditions. Some of the protests here are organized to actually support the the presidential candidate. So it's near the election, general election in Indonesia, and it's a time for these precarious workers to be part of the large political mobilization. And this is not new because 5 years ago, in 2019, 4 years ago in 2019, same thing happened. Groups of drivers show that support to the presidential candidate, but after the election, some of these groups that show their support was dissolved. So it seems like the group were formed to show their support to presidential candidate. This means that they have central role in political mobilization, but up to now, they have gained nothing from the support that they gave to the candidate during election. So that's some of the contradiction that I found. So how to address these contradictions? That's the sort of question raised by Kevin. So I did fieldwork for intermittently for 4 years, and the focus is on gig work and collective organizing among gig workers in Indonesia. But with an eye to make connections with the global trends. So I try to make a comparison and make contrast to what happened in other parts of the world. And within the research, I use historical data supplemented with broad comparative insights to interpret the primary data. Here are some of the articles that came out from the research process. Part of the work look at the formation of solidarity among these workers. Some other part of the work look at the connection between precarity and rising Islamism. So what sort of groups identity that are appealing for these workers? That's the question asked. But the research, my whole research actually tries to understand the contradictions between the forces that make works more individualized, as already explained by Angeli, and also the other forces that lead to forms of collectivism. I make the argument that the contradictions affect workers in different parts of the world in very distinct ways, because the different way in which precarity has expanded, and that affects the way workers respond to it. So Angeli asked what is actually new about the gig economy. I found that it's new because in Indonesia context, and I guess across the global south, it's new because it actually the business has actually taken advantages from the large informal economies, and it expands by institutionalizing older kind of precarious work, those practice in the urban informal economy to be extensively deployed in the formal economy. But because they are part of this large informal economy, it's difficult for these gig workers in Indonesia to use a precarity-based discourse to articulate their workplace grievances, because I believe that precarity is conceptualized as a problem mostly in the rich democracy, where there's a history of more stable employment patterns, and there's also history of stronger organized labor movement. So in this under these circumstances, it's incredibly challenging for workers in Indonesia who has never had the historical memories of any stable work pattern, and no experience with strong union that can actually protect workers' right to unite and articulate their grievances using a precarity-based discourse. In a sense, it's difficult for them to actually see precarity as a problem. So I use this term entrepreneurial identity. I borrow from Michel Foucault's conceptualization of entrepreneurial self. The work process in the gig economy, as explained also by Anjali, that rely on algorithmic managerial control and deny workers collective bargaining rights contributes to making the experience of work a highly individualized one. This shows the pressure to individualization. Workers and also their status as partners, not employees, makes them so precarious. Actually, habituate these workers to the role as the sole bearer of most work-related risk. They are conditioned to personalize their problems and solution, thus ignoring the structural problems that underpin their precarity. Some of them even eschew, entirely avoid collective organization. But this happened in a specific historical context. Again, the informal sector has been pervasive in Indonesia and I think across the global south, and precarity has also been prevalent in the formal sector because industrialization started late in the 70s under the EOE, export orientation industrialization, and it relied a lot on cheap and docile labor. So even in the formal sector, which traditionally considered as providing more secure job has always been job was to an extent degree precarious. Also, the welfare system has been underdeveloped and unreliable, and even after authoritarianism and unions have limited influence on policy and working life, and becoming mostly irrelevant for most workers. So in short, there's even with this forces to collectivism, there are these other forces that individualize workers, making workers seeing themselves as the bearers of most work-related risk, and it's hard to challenge these forces of individualization in such a context where there's historically there's never been a pattern of a standard employment relationship, and unionization and effective working class movement have not been strong. This is my last slide. We've seen in Indonesia communities of online transport drivers mushroom in big cities, especially Jakarta. Such communities work in a way that allow driver to cope with the everyday precarity. They share responsibilities to improve their own well-being. And it's true that some of these communities can actually be the vehicle that help workers to push for their demand to the state for a better working conditions to business and companies. However, because the way these communities work together to help worker navigating the day-to-day precarity, they also inadvertently instill the neoliberal derived entrepreneurial aspirations. They most of them say that they rely on the communities a lot to survive, so they don't want the communities to engage in protests, because a protest or demonstration. So in that sense, the communities also become the vehicle that promote non-conflictual relationship between workers and employers. Again, even in the sort of collectivism that organically form among drivers, we can see challenges for uniting this worker under a shared identity, which can actually help them to understand that their problems are not an individual problem, and that the state and the business are actually are the problem. So it's not them that are the problem, but it's actually the way the state and the business organize this. That's the problem. It remains difficult for some of these workers to see this. I will end my presentation there. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Again, really wonderful presentation. And again, lots of insights. I think, just to pick up on one thing, I think something you said about precarity is really interesting, because as we know, in Indonesia and across Asia, more broadly, most of the workers are in informal sectors, right? I think at least over 60% of workers are in informal sectors. And in fact, I think for a lot of workers, the kind of platform work, food deliveries work, it's actually, to a lot of workers, probably the most formal jobs they have ever got, right? The other job that probably they have done are much more informal, in the sense that they may not even get paid, or there's nothing that guarantee any rights at all, or any conditions. Whereas at least some of the platform-based gig works actually provide some kind of guarantee. So I guess I'm trying to sort of think more carefully about this idea of precarity and the use of precarity as kind of mobilization discourse. Because again, I think for a lot of workers, even though I think maybe in more industrialized economies in North America and Europe, platform work represents a much more informal and precarious kind of work. But in many parts of Asia, and assuming in Africa as well, it's actually more formal than many other kind of work around, right? So let's definitely continue the discussion there. So next, and we have Edward Weberster. Let me pull up his biography, even though I think many of us here have read his work over many years. So Eddie is a distinguished professor at the Southern Center for Inequality Studies at Wits University in Johannesburg in South Africa. His current research focuses on the production and reproduction of inequality in the workplace and the use of labor power as a strategy for reducing this inequality. He, of course, has co-authored and edited many book volumes on labor. Most recently, he has just published Recasting Workers' Power, Work, and Inequality in the Shadow of the Digital Age. Eddie, if you can start, you have the next 20 minutes. Thanks.
It looks like Eddie has dropped out.
Yeah, to the audience. So Eddie happens to be at the airport. He just got off a flight. He was able to talk to us a while ago, but he's not here anymore. So I think we will see if he can reconnect. Alf, do you mind trying to contact Eddie to see if he's able to jump back?
Yeah, I've just messaged him, so let's see what he says.
Yeah, so maybe in the meantime, I maybe in the meantime we can sort of give some time for questions. You know, for anyone in the audience want to ask a question, please feel free to put in the Q&A box. Maybe we'll come back to the question that we have just been discussing. Tika, maybe start with you. You know, again, this idea of precarity. I wonder how you think about precarity and because you mentioned, you know, that that's not always something that workers maybe relate to. Can you talk more about how workers see this idea of precarity and whether that's a useful way to as a mobilization discourse?
All right. I think Anjali also touched these issues. So most of the companies, the business, they and those that advocate for the gig economy, they usually use the image of happy workers because they are independent and flexible, and they have the freedom to use their own time. So that's how that's most of the workers that I interviewed actually say that they are happy. It's the most and as you mentioned, this work, it's the most formal job that they can get. So it's also related to their history, their biography, or of moving in and out precarious job. And it's also intergenerational precarity because their parents, most of them were migrants, and they didn't have stable jobs. So again, so then how effective is using the discourse of precarity? Because the term precarity is connected to the stable employment relationship. It's hard for these workers to can actually associate or connect themselves to this term. It's hard to imagine a condition of precarity when you are actually doesn't really know what safety or stability means. That's the point. But I will not say that it's a waste of time to actually try to mainstream this idea. It is still a problem and it needs to be addressed. But to say to people, unions come to them, right, reaching out to them, bringing this discourse of precarity, but it's challenging for these workers to actually see it as a problem. I will just stop there. I will just end there.
Yeah. No, thank you. Anjali, what do you think? I mean, I'm wondering whether this resonates, like what Tika was talking about in the Indonesia context, whether that resonates at all with regard to India.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, when we look into precarity, we really need to look into the structural positioning of people engaged in the precarious jobs. For example, in India, our structural inequalities are marked by class, caste, gender, religion, and etc. And most of our population, if I can recall it properly, then almost 60% of our population is engaged in agriculture and allied workers, while its contribution to the GDP is just 17 or 18%. So there is overcrowding of agriculture in agriculture. Also, as I talked to gig workers, blanket delivery workers, it came out that most of them are coming from Bihar or Uttar Pradesh, who were earlier doing agriculture, and since the remuneration there was so low that they have to escape and come to cities for any sort of work that they are getting at hand. So yeah, precarity is often most of the time it's generational, it's structural, and that's how it reproduces as well in the society.
So like I guess I'm also just sort of interested in thinking through more of this. You actually, both of you interestingly use Foucault. I'm wondering, like, maybe coming back to Anjali, like you use this idea of digital panopticism to describe the kind of surveillance or control mechanisms. I mean, to me, the idea of panopticism means that, as a prisoner, you actually don't know, or as a worker, you actually don't know when you are being under surveillance or not. So you just act kind of as if you are being under surveillance all the time. What about for gig workers? Because they don't see anyone physical. Obviously, there's no supervisor behind you, as you would, find in a factory work. But the cell phone, your smartphone is with you 24 hours. It's monitoring your activity all the time. So can you talk a bit more about maybe the different ways in which, for example, the more traditional, supervisor kind of control mechanism versus kind of the digital, what is the advantage and disadvantage to workers, for example, in terms of their resistance and maybe making things easier for themselves, and then this kind of tightened surveillance?
Yeah. So as in my presentation also, I located and theorized my thing into capitalism. And if we say capitalism, especially from 1970s onward, has been incorporating its criticisms and evolving itself to suit its purposes. Similarly, the biggest critique of the neoliberal order or the capitalist order has been the exploitation of laborers. So how do we make that invisibilize? So let's bring out a system where there is no boss. Evidently, there is no boss. So if there is no boss, there is no exploitation. So for people who do not understand non-traditional sense of working, for them this might look revolutionary and more liberalizing. So there were few of the workers with whom I had a talk. They were finding it beneficial that now we don't work under bosses. So they find it better that they do not have to work under a supreme authority, as that authority is invisibilized. There is no evident bosses over their heads. But on the other hand, they have to be on their phones 24/7. So the algorithm is their boss. So they are subjected to answering the messages, taking orders, and delivering wherever the location lies. Even in blanket pattern, the workers usually get a order within 1 or 2 kilometers. And on the contrary, company has made a new policy of uh, that according to the kilometers traveled, your wage will increase. Now, workers only get orders within 1 or 2 kilometers ambit. There is no provision that they'll get orders which are in kind of far away places. So it's hoax. Everything is being blurred. Everything is being blurred absolutely, and there is no idea of what's happening around. And under such messy atmosphere, workers are getting exploited, and most of them are not getting like a cue of what they are supposed to do, as they are so dispersed. There is no the typical or the traditional sense of union working happening right now with workers. Though unions are making efforts to organize gig workers, as far as I have seen on the field, but still we have a long way to go to understand how the gig platform works, how the algorithm works, uh, and I mean, as the unionists also say that to do protest or to strike for someone who's a daily wage earner is too big a thing to ask. So I would say that the trade unions can either make a protest or a strike fund, or we can have crowdfunding before a protest or a strike. So we really need to keep the material needs of workers in mind before going forward with any of it. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. So coming back to you, Tika, I'm wondering if you want to comment on like the couple of things that Angelique just mentioned. One is this question of surveillance, and the other question is about the role of the union. I wonder if what you may want to say on either or both of this question in the Indonesia context.
Yeah, yeah, I also I've seen the same thing. The role of algorithmic management and the status of the classification of partner itself also that makes them see themselves and the atomization of the work practices. But I also think it's important. I also think in Indonesia, it's probably in India too. It's not only what happened within the labor process, but also the historical context where the labor process has taken place. As I said, the personal biography of moving in and out precarious work makes it conditions the normalization of precarity to me. And with regards to the union, these workers unions have actually tried to reach out to them, but the discourse that the unions offer, that they are workers, not that these workers are workers and not entrepreneur, it's not something that widely accepted. That's one thing. And the unions themselves in Indonesia, they also have their own problems. They are fragmented and they also fight against each other. So it make it easier for this union to actually organize these gig workers. In addition to that, these gig workers in Indonesia have been actually organized by other organizations, the CSOs, those that work with the urban poor, for instance. And some Islamist organization, they also reach out to this group with different offering different discourses. So it's like a competition of discourses there. And yep. So what the workers do is, to me, it's actually picking up which one is more it makes sense for them. And it might not be what the union offers, because it gains little resonance with their everyday precarity.
Yeah, I think this is. Yeah, sorry. I think this is something really interesting because sometimes, and I think your analysis point somewhat to that direction, in the sense that we analyze gig workers in terms of their very sort of individualized and atomized sort of labor process, work relationship, I think you also mentioned entrepreneurship, this idea that they are more of entrepreneur than the workers. But very often we may say less about the fact the unions are themselves, not that interested, not that keen to organizing them, right? So it's where do we play, not the blame, but where do we blame the reason, place the reasons for workers not being organized, right? Is it just because of the labor process, or it's actually also the some of the challenges that the existing labor movement, union movement, has that prevent them from organizing gig workers?
It's too bad that Edward is missing, because I think we will talk about that. But yeah, it's too bad that it's probably bad connection. But yeah.
What about in India? What's I think you, Anjali, you already mentioned the unions, but if I can sort of push you to say a bit more, because I know the unions there, India have been organizing or trying to organize gig workers. Have they been successful, or if not, why not?
Sorry, I couldn't catch the last sentence.
Oh, if they have been are those efforts have been successful or not? And if not, what are the reasons?
Their efforts are certainly showing positive efforts, like positive responses. Also, I would say that the mode of operation of union workers when it comes to gig work has to be evolved in line with the way gig work is emerging. For example, the union I was working with has brought a bike of the union so that the workers can engage and at the same pace as the workers are working. So yeah, their modes of operation has to be evolved so that there's a pace between development of union as well as how the gig work is evolving with time, because certainly that's something new. The mode of operation is very new and digital. Also, the thing that I have noticed in trade unions is the usage of social media these days. As compared to like 5 years back, unions have been extremely vocal and very elaborative on social media platform, Instagram, Twitter, and everything. So that's also engaging with the youth. So I mean, that's where things are changing, and certainly on one hand we have nothing, and now when the unions are doing some efforts, obviously it's going to be positive. But yeah, there are a number of challenges which the unions need to address to tackle the gig work problem effectively. And some of it I already mentioned in my presentation. The other is, funds for strikes and protest, then the bike thing or the car thing, so that they can keep pace with the drivers or workers for delivery orders. And in India, I would say the problem is huge unemployment rate. Even recently, there was this report, State of Working India, which was released, which showed that majority of the unemployed people in India are actually graduates. So that is the...
Oh, I think Eddie is back.
Yeah.
Oh, but I need to finish your thought first before we come back to.
Yeah, so I'll quickly say that unemployment is continuously increasing, and so is the informal nature of the new work that is being coming into the labor market. So to tackle this work, we need to really keep up with the platforms using technology. So there has to be a better use of technology, and as well as the transportation and more deliberate actions from the part of unions to form effective collaborative actions in the coming times.
Great, thanks so much. We're lucky to have Eddie back. Eddie, are you able to speak? We don't have a huge amount of time. If you can maybe talk for 15 minutes, that would be great. You're on mute right now.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes. Please go ahead.
Okay, right. Well, I apologize for this. I was cut off in the airport, but let me just say how pleased I am for this opportunity to connect with my Asian colleagues and comrades. Essentially, what I want to talk about is a new book that that I've just published, Recasting Workers' Power, Working in the Shadow of the Digital Age. Could you move it on to the next slide? There you see a picture of the cover of the book. Essentially, what we're arguing here is that there's a new regime of accumulation based on precarious work. And secondly, that the established and traditional trade unions in Africa are focusing on stable, permanent type workers. And this is reproducing a dual labor market. However, at the core of our argument is that new forms of organizing are emerging, what we call hybrid forms. They're not traditional trade unions, they're kind of a mixture, cooperative, association, trade union. And the central thrust of it is that power is being recast in this phase of accumulation. If you could move on to the next slide. So what our findings are suggesting that in the global south, I'm already talking about Africa, a process of dualization is taking place, a process where unions defend existing strongholds and focus on those workers in stable jobs, reproducing the dualities in labor markets. These unions prioritize the interests of their permanent members, even in some cases opposing the organizing efforts of the growing number of casual workers. But these new precarious workers of the digital age are not passive victims. They are, in fact, beginning to organize, and a new phase of struggle we're suggesting is emerging, and new sources of power. Thank you. We illustrate our argument with 3 case studies. I just want to focus on the first one, and I wanted to mention that the previous speaker, the first speaker, okay, we're framing the study in terms of power resources, the idea that at the center of any revitalization of labor is power, the ability of someone to get somebody to do something that wouldn't otherwise have done. The core of that being structural power, ability to disrupt, associational power, the ability to organize, societal power, which is really drawing on public institutions, and institutional power, the law and institutions, labor market institutions. Okay, let's move on. I think the first case study I wanted to speak to is very similar to the first presentation. We call it authoritarian algorithmic management, but we're suggesting it's a double-edged sword. We focused on food couriers, mainly Uber Eats, that are not being organized by traditional trade unions. It's a highly individualized labor process, but what's emerged is worker-driven messaging apps and chat groups where they share information, develop a shared identity, announce local direct action. Although their classification as self-employed work weakens their organizing power, the potential for associational power is dramatically increased when workers meet face-to-face at work zones and begin to form a collective identity. although they've engaged in collective action, this has had limited impact. Instead, they've formed a relationship with the support of international NGO and are putting forward demands to regulate their work and thus strengthen their institutional power. If I could just hold this for a moment here, I was very struck by the first presentation who described this as the delivery work as a form of panopticon using Foucault. I talk about digital tailorism. I see this form of work as a form of digital tailorism because, just as Taylor argued a century ago, the need to break down work into its small parts and a monopoly of authority and power and knowledge in management's hands. I think this work is similar, and what we're suggesting is it's a move forward back to the past, exactly as the first speaker was right. That is a form of casual labor, piecework, very similar to that characterized by 19th century capitalism. The second case study is in a successful example of union revitalization in Uganda, where in Kampala, it's the capital city, where the union crossed the divide between informal and formal by defining these motorcycle taxi, known locally as border riders, as potential union members, and were able to expand the union from 5,000 members to over 100,000 members. So it's a dramatic example of successful organization. The interesting thing about it is they drew on the International Transport Federation, a global union of transport workers, which is very successful in building the union. And importantly, where trade unions have taken up the issues of informal workers, unions have also undergone fundamental change. So it transformed the union and creating what we call in the book hybrid organizations. That is a kind of mixture of traditional unionism, informal worker associations, and cooperatives. So a kind of new form of organization we are suggesting is emerging. And our third case study, my final case study, is an example of transnational activism, where Bill Gates introduced a for-profit organization that would create computers and to undermine the professional role of the teachers, and there was a global campaign against this. And I think our argument here is that that the global unions are playing an important role in Africa. So let me just to bring it to a conclusion. I think what we are suggesting here is that, and the question is raised here by our book, is whether these embryonic forms of work organization, what we're calling a southern trend, are sustainable and could become the foundation of a new cycle of worker solidarity and union growth. Our findings show how informal solidaristic groups among workers continue. So you're getting these sort of embryonic forms of organization, and they could, we're suggesting, revitalize if they have the courage to innovate and experiment with new forms of association, use digital tools, and broaden the union's reach through coalition building with other civil society groups. But I suppose the message we're having here, but instead of assuming that every worker will get a full-time job with benefits, established labor needs to acknowledge that the world of work is irrevocably changed, and adopting an experimental approach to representation and bargaining is the only way which it can secure a future. I think that's a central theme. We're suggesting that we're entering a phase of experimentation with forms of organization. New forms of work are generating new forms of organization. If traditional unions continue to focus exclusively on those workers in stable jobs, which our research suggests is happening in Africa, the growing number of precarious workers will be left without a voice and will have to build their power afresh. The result will be deepening inequality, this dualization, and a diverging labor movement. What we've called dualization will shape Southern Labour's future. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you so much, Eddie, and thanks for making the effort to try to rejoin us in very difficult circumstances. So we do have a few more minutes, and people, anyone who would like to ask a question, please feel free to type it in the chat or in the Q&A box. There's already one question about power, and I think Eddie brought up something that is really interesting question, which is to what extent is this organizing resistance by gig workers one way to revitalize the labor movement, right? Because I think in most places, the labor movement seems to be very weak, in retreat, fragmented, unable to maybe successfully advocate for workers' protection. So maybe let's start one round of question about this question, power. How much power do you think gig workers hold? And do you think they are revitalizing, or they hold the possibility of revitalizing labor movement?
May I answer that question?
Please, we can start. Everyone get a chance.
By the way, I noticed I appear as Michael Burroy here. I'm not Michael Burroy. He's a good friend of mine. He's standing next to me, but I'm Eddie Webster. Look, I think the central argument is what we're making in the book, is that the new technology is a double-edged sword. It's a double-edged sword in the sense that it extends control over workers in a way unprecedented in history. And Angela used the word panopticon. I think that's one way of understanding it. I call it a form of digital Taylorism. It's unprecedented in history because not only is the boss, if you like, the algorithm invisible, it's also inaccessible. However, and this is what's emerged from our research here, it's a contradictory process, because the very technology that extends control and surveillance over you also at the same time connects you together. It connects you together on the chat groups, on your WhatsApp groups. And what we found is that these informal digital groups emerged and were mechanisms where you shared common solidarity. They came together when there were accidents, when they often are on the roads. They came together for collective action. So you have a kind of embryonic union-like, let's call them union-like organizations that are forming. And in that sense, our argument and my answer to you, Kevin, is that the technology could be seen as a double-edged sword.
Great, Eddie. Maybe Anjali, you want to respond to both this question about power, but also I think Eddie's suggestion, or I don't know, comparison between your digital panopticism and his idea of digital Taylorism.
So commenting on power, I would like to bring the Black liberal, Black feminist understanding of empowerment. So they understood empowerment as a collective force, as a collective action to counter the structural inequalities and structural orthodoxies existing in the society. So in gig work also, I would say that the power of workers in the collective. So if the unions or the workers themselves are collectively organizing in a certain manner, that is pushing the companies, the platforms, and I mean, they're having a crunch between workers and companies so that they can increase their bargaining power through collective action. So I understand this as a form of empowerment, if not typical Foucauldian sense of power. So, I mean, definitely we have different ways to understand what's happening around. So this will be it.
What about digital Taylorism? Like, do you think that could be a useful way of looking at it, or do you think that's maybe a different way of?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, gig work as it's coming out, it's evolving, it's growing every day. So we can use as many mechanisms as possible to make a sense of what's happening around. But for me, the crux of the situation lies in reaching to the roots of the causes. So if we are using any framework which is detached from the field, then definitely it's not make any sense. So for me, the crux remains to get connected to the field, to real people of flesh and blood, to real experiences, and then place any theory, so that there is this parallel give and take relation between theories, praxis. Yeah.
Tika, what do you think? I want to have you also join the conversation. Tika, do you think both? I don't know if you want to comment on the sort of duality of technology, but also this idea of power. I think Adi also mentioned in his summary of his book, despite all the organizing, it seemed to have very limited impact. What do you see in Indonesia?
Yeah, I agree with the centrality of technology, but I also think that it's not only technology, not only the labor process, but the broader context that where this sort of technology is being used. Because work grievances, I presume, will always be there in those sort of labor process that makes workers work that hard. But it's also what has actually been what is there outside, not outside, and in addition to the labor process itself. So the context in which the gig economy has expanded is also important, because this context shaped by history define what is work. It influenced the way workers see themselves, see their position as workers in the relationship with the technology, and what sort of organized labor movement that has exists in that particular place where the gig economy is expanding. It's also important. So when resistance has taken place, what sort of movement that can actually that is available, or what sort of discourses that are available and can be tapped on by these workers, and can leverage their movement into the resistance, collective resistance, into something. So that's my comment on technology. I think it's also important to see the specific context in which the technology is being used to control labor. Yeah, I think that's my comment.
Great. We'll give you a chance, Eddie, to respond as well. But maybe just to be mindful of people's time, we're a little bit over time. But I do want to ask, maybe use my privilege as moderator, this questions about what more should we know, or what more should we include in the research agenda? Because I think I have read quite a lot of articles about gig workers across the world. And my sort of impression is that our understanding or research seem to be hitting some kind of limits. We see some kind of repetitions, among scholars, like how much do we know, or how much can we know what's happening? I'm wondering, maybe that may not be your assessment, but I'm wondering, you have all done a lot of research. What else should we know? Like what is missing, and what should be put on the research agenda for future research? Maybe we start with you, Eddie. And maybe Tina, if you want to go first. Yeah, go ahead.
I agree with Eddie that we need to accept that the world has changed. The way work is done has changed. So that's the first thing. I don't think we can rely mostly. I agree that the stable employment relationship in contrast to precarious work is still the best option, but it might not be strategic to organize around the discourse. But it might not be strategic to always rely on unions or more established vehicle. I think what is needed to actually understand the sort of alternatives that available, even though it might not seem like it's the sort of alternatives. Like my one part of the research is look at the appeal of Islamism among these workers, and we actually identified a place, the small religious groups where workers see as non-political, and which at the same time also being used by more conservative politicians to mobilize workers. But hey, it's a possible space, because in Indonesia, that sort of religious groups, or most workers communities have that religious groups, and perhaps it's something we need to understand. It's probably not, it doesn't sound progressive, but it can probably an option. Yeah.
Heidi, do you want to respond, or?
No, I mean, I think Taika is making an important point about context. In Africa, 90% of the work is informal, in the informal economy, and while the technology may be the same in Europe, in in the global north, it has implications. And what we're suggesting is that what's happening in Africa is a kind of self-organization, if you know what I mean. Workers are coming together in different forms. Let's call them associations. We call it a hybrid form. So I think there's a great value, particularly in comparing the kinds of responses across the global south, that I think are there are a great deal of similarities, but there are also interesting differences that I think comparative studies would be very valuable of that. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much. Anjali, do you have any sort of final thoughts or responses to any of the points raised?
So this isn't my core inquiry of my PhD research, but the amount that I have read and worked on the field as far as gig work is concerned, I also saw that there is a lack of getting company platforms, operators into the dialogue. We are working on gig workers, but we are completely ignoring the side of the platforms. We also need to engage them into the dialogue and hold them accountable for XYZ things that they're doing. Also, we need to bring state into the dialogue. Where does a state stands as far as the gig work platforms is concerned? For example, in India, we have the Social Security Code, which concerns gig work platform gig work, and there is a lot of criticism happening right now over there because it has cemented the position of gig workers as not the traditional workers. I mean, outside the ambit of employer-employee relationships, which will eventually result in scraping of all the labor laws that applies to the traditional or the general understanding of workers. So we need to keep all the parties involved, all the stakeholders involved to be in the dialogue, so that a discursive analysis can happen for the progressiveness of gig workers.
Great. I know we can continue for another hour, but we are running a little bit over time, and we want to be respectful of people's time. But I also do want to ask Alf, who has been instrumental in organizing this event, if you have anything to say, but also if you want to announce any future events.
No, in terms of future events, just keep an eye on what we do in terms of these transregional dialogues, and I'm sure there'll be lots more of them. I think what's transpired today is that there's plenty of scope for that. I just wanted to add one point, which I put in a chat box as well, which I think is that Chica makes an excellent point about the contingency of the politics that can emerge out of precarity, that one cannot assume progressiveness. I think there's a lot to be said for the kind of cross-class constituencies of right-wing authoritarian populism that we've seen emerge in the global south in different forms and to different degrees. In South Africa, we have them in the form of a rallying around xenophobia and law and order politics on the margins of ANC hegemony. In India, you have it as a full-blown Hindu nationalist hegemony, which has quite significant support from what you would call working class voters if election surveys are to be believed. So I think one has to be really attentive to the contingency there and the real possibility that the structures of feeling that emerge out of precarity can also be harnessed for very reactionary political purposes. And that the direction that will take, the political direction of responses to precarity, is something that one will have to struggle over to give direction to, and that progressiveness cannot be assumed. That's my only comment, and also thanks to the three speakers and to Eddie's technical assistant for bringing him back in when we lost him.
Great, thank you very much. Yeah, I want to thank all the speakers and of course all the organizers of this event. I am sure this is just the beginning of many more conversations, actions to have. I think we barely scratched the surface this time, and I hope we have more opportunities for discussion. So thank you everyone, and thank you everyone for joining, and have a good day and good night. Bye-bye.